You are listening to Death and Diamonds, researched and presented by Mark Felton. Episode 2. As soon as rebel leader Calais heard the approach of helicopters, he knew that the game was up. Thinking that he had nothing left to lose, he ordered his men to kill Major Marshall and the other hostages. As a group of West Side boys ran towards the house in Gibiri Bana, where Marshall and the others were imprisoned, intending to shoot them, an SAS team suddenly opened fire with their M16A2 assault rifles, killing them all with double-tap shots to the head and sternum. At 6:40 a.m., Fire Team 1, having alighted from the Chinook, assaulted the hostage house with stun grenades, while 11 other fire teams fanned out from the landing zones, eliminating all rebels who showed themselves. Alongside the house where Major Marshall and his men were being held was another hut containing 17 Sierra Leonean hostages who had been kidnapped a week earlier. "There was so much shouting and shooting, it was terrible," said hostage Emmanuel Faber. "We saw a British soldier outside, so we called out, 'Civilian hostages, don't shoot.' They brought us out the back of the building, tied us up, and made us lie face down in case we were West Side boys. The Major, Marshall, confirmed our identity later." The Parachute Regiment assault was so strong that many of the rebels ran off into the jungle, temporarily disorganized and afraid. They later regrouped and counterattacked. At the village of Magbeni, the Chinook landing zone turned out to be a swamp, which caused some problems for the assaulting paras. In Gebeni Bana, the SAS was tasked with protecting the freed hostages and locating Lieutenant Bangura. They fought off several strong attacks by the regrouped West Side boys. Down the road in Magbeni, the paras fought hard against strong rebel opposition that included mortars. The battle was not entirely one-sided, and in fact for some time it appeared as though the rebels were gaining the edge, something the British could not believe. Accepted military wisdom regarding African rebels was that they would run away when confronted by properly trained and motivated Western military forces. It was, as they say, a damn close-run thing, a parachute regiment insider later said. "It was just that far from being a total F-up. You've got to ask why we took so many hits. Taking 1 in 10 is fairly serious. We were pretty lucky not to have lost more men given the number of wounded." Captain Liam Cradden, 30-year-old second-in-command of the troops assaulting Magbeni, was shocked by the amount of firepower that the West Side boys levelled at his men and the teams that assaulted Giberi Bana across the river. Corporal Simon Dawes, a 29-year-old section commander, was thrust immediately into serious combat. He said, "It was a very scary experience. I don't like to talk about it too much. But when the battle started, the training just took over." Cradden described the attack on Magbeni as a systematic, company-level assault on a fixed position. For all of the members of the one para company assaulting Magbeni and Giberi Bana, it was their first experience of combat. "This is the only firefight I've ever been in," said Corporal Dawes. "It's the only experience I had of a two-way, as we call it, when the rounds are coming towards you. This company is a very young company, and none of us had ever experienced it before." Youth was no hindrance when it came to grading the para's fighting performance. "There are an awful lot of young guys in our unit, and they performed exceptionally professionally," recalled Cradden. "We were proud to be asked to take part in this operation." The para's command team at Magbeni was struck by a rebel mortar bomb, and most of the senior officers leading the mission were wounded and incapacitated. "There was a loud explosion, and we could hear these agonizing screams," said Private Julian Sheard, age 19. The British found themselves under intense fire from familiar weapons, for the West Side boys were largely armed with British-manufactured self-loading rifles, SLRs, and general-purpose machine guns, GPMGs. The British had sent the Sierra Leonean Armed Forces 14,000 firearms in June 2000, but many had subsequently fallen into rebel hands. Acting Captain Danny Matthews, aged only 21, took command of the Paras, and he led the men in a sweep through the village against dozens of rebel positions, killing many of the enemy and forcing the survivors to flee into the jungle. The fighting was intense and at close quarters, and were it not for the Paras' ingrained aggression and training to take the fight to the enemy, the battle could have been in doubt. At 7 a.m., all of the remaining hostages were evacuated from Kibiri Bana by Chinook, where they were flown straight out to RFA Percival for medical treatment. They looked as you would expect from people who've spent 2 weeks in the jungle, recalled Second Officer Peter Burns aboard RFA Sir Percival. Very bedraggled, long beards, filthy, but basically okay. We said, "We're glad to see you," and they said, "Not half as glad as we are to see you." By 10:30 a.m., the last British troops had departed from the 2 villages. Job done. They had killed about 25 rebels, though numerous blood trails leading into the jungle suggested several more had been badly wounded, and they had captured 18, including the leader, Calais. 1 British soldier had been killed, and 12 other British soldiers had been wounded. Bombardier Bradley Tinian, aged 26, was serving a tour with the SAS with the rank of trooper, and he had been fatally wounded in the fight around the hostage houses in Kibiri Bana. It had been a textbook operation with a happy outcome, and the effects of the operation were far-reaching. Other rebel groups, perhaps fearing that the British would extend their military operations and deal with other militias in a similar fashion, began to surrender, and within 16 months the civil war was over. For his gallant actions in rallying his men in Mugbeni village while under furious rebel fire after the senior officers directing the assault had been felled by mortar fragments, Acting Captain Matthews received the Military Cross. Also receiving military crosses were Company Sergeant Major Harry Bartlett, Captain Evan Fury and Major James Criswell, all of the Parachute Regiment. Colour Sergeant John Baycroft of the Paras and Squadron Leader Ian McFarlane of the RAF, who piloted one of the Chinooks under heavy fire, were both awarded Britain's second highest decoration for military bravery, the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. A Distinguished Service Cross was awarded to Captain George Zambellas, commander of HMS Chatham, for his gallant and distinguished services during the operations off Sierra Leone, and distinguished flying crosses went to some of the pilots and crews, the Lynx and Chinook helicopters, who braved considerable ground fire to get the Paras and SAS into the 2 rebel villages: Flight Lieutenant Timothy Burgess, Flight Lieutenant Jonathan Priest, and Flight Lieutenant Paul Shepherd, both of the RAF, and Captain Alan Moyes of the Royal Marines. Following Operation Barras, the problem of trying to restore peace to Sierra Leone was turned back over to the United Nations, but the British had no confidence in the UN force and continued to maintain their own military presence in the country. As a ceasefire was reached with the RUF rebels in late 2000 and large-scale disarmament of rebels began, the last significant British presence in Sierra Leone, 2nd Battalion the Light Infantry, departed at the end of September 2001. But the British continued to try and provide stability during the disarmament period, sending in a company of Gurkhas and a Royal Navy frigate in March 2003. The British fund the International Security Advisory Team in Sierra Leone today that helps the Sierra Leonean armed forces and the nation to improve, and is staffed by British soldiers, civil servants and police officers. If Operation Barras had failed, British forces would most probably have been pulled out of Sierra Leone, and the militias would have seized complete control, with terrible consequences for the people of Sierra Leone and the wider region. That it succeeded against strong opposition confirms the professionalism and fighting abilities of the British Armed Forces. You have been listening to Death and Diamonds, written and narrated by Mark Felton. For a wide variety of military history documentaries, visit my other YouTube channel, Mark Felton Productions, details below. You can also help support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, which is very much appreciated. Details once again in the description box below.